there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome back. CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting dodo birds and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what to do to the like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel. Please also do that while you're here. Let's get into it. Today we are continuing our series on the top 25 college basketball stories of the past 25 years, which is really just Norlander's top 25 college basketball stories of the past 25 years, minus Bob Knight's termination at Indiana on September 10th, 2000. I was not consulted on this list. I had no input. I'm only here to get us in and out of words from our partners and to see if I can somehow make every single one of these stories about me. Norlander, we've already done numbers 25 through number 16. I've enjoyed this so far. Are you ready to unveil the next 5 of the top 25 college basketball stories of the past 25 years, minus Indiana firing Bob Knight in September 2000?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yes, we're doing the next 5 here. Glad to be here with you and glad to continue this series. We are going to get into on this episode some national title winners, some title games, and I figured right off the top I'd address some of the national champions that did not make the list, but at least want to do, some honorable mentions. These are 5 national championship games / title winners that felt the biggest and most meaningful, at least to me in retrospect, doing this, but didn't make the list. In chronological order, Maryland winning in 2002 with Juan Dixon, Gary Williams, fairly big deal. Don't think that's one of the 25 biggest stories of the past 25 years, though. Kansas beating Memphis in 2008, the way it happened. Dozier at midcourt for the championship, of course, under strong consideration. One of the better championship games of this century, but didn't make the list. Kentucky under John Calipari in 2012 with Anthony Davis, obviously a dominant team. A very, very good team, a very big story. Came close to making the list, but that ultimately did not get on there. K's last championship in 2015 with Duke. It's notable, certainly, for being the last of all the championships that Mike Krzyzewski won, but that didn't make the list. And then Baylor winning in 2021. That didn't make the list, but Baylor in general will be to come on this series regardless. And that championship happening in the COVID bubble and all that kind of stuff. So those were national championship games winners that didn't make the list. We're going to get to some more here today. And also I've heard from a few folks, there's not going to be there's been a lot of incredible games over the past 25 years, but really amazing games, usually speaking, don't translate to big picture, meaningful stories. So, Duke beating Maryland in the Miracle Minute in 2001. Yeah, that was awesome. Illinois, Arizona, like a lot of tournament games. Illinois, Arizona, Elite Eight. A&M coming back against Northern Iowa, which is technically the greatest comeback in the history of the NCAA tournament. Almost a decade ago at this point, GP. Syracuse and UConn, 6 overtimes. Kentucky defeating undefeated Wichita State in the tournament. There's been a lot of amazing ones. Buddy Hield going for 40+ against Kansas at Kansas in triple overtime. That was a number 1 versus number 2 game. All that stuff's not going to make the list, but they were incredible things to look back on. But yeah, that's just a quick round of other honorable mentions that were certainly under consideration, but don't make the list proper.
So not every national champion is going to be one of the 25 biggest stories in college basketball the past 25 years, but watch what I'm about to do. Back-to-back champions, those are going to make the list, aren't they?
They are, and that's where we're going to start here right now. In fact, I'll spoil the next 2, and we'll talk one and then the other in the order that I put them on the list here. Back-to-back national championships are a big deal. I put Florida at 15, and then UConn at 14 on the list overall. If you want to make the case for Florida to be ahead of UConn, I'm certainly here for it. I think you can make the case to me. UConn winning back-to-back championships, a slightly bigger deal, and we'll explain why. But let's dive into Florida. They win back-to-back championships in 2006 and 2007. They become the first program when they do this since Duke to win back-to-back championships. It wasn't just that. It's the fact that they did this with almost the entire same roster returning year over year. In 05-06, Florida went 33-6. It had the 3rd best record in the SEC that season. GP was 10-6 in league play. Got a 3 seed. And Joakim Noah, Torian Green, Al Horford, Corey Brewer. They're all sophomores. They're all in the same class. Really, one of the, particularly now as we look back on this, there have been some incredible recruiting classes, obviously. But when you want to look at least 4 players in one recruiting class that won a national championship, that foursome, that quartet with Florida really does rank among the best ever when you consider what they did and what they accomplished there. They all averaged between, in that season, 05-06, they averaged between 11.3 and 14.2 points. They all would have been drafted in 06 had they decided to leave. Noah, Brewer, and Horford probably would have gone in the first round, but they decided to come back. And not only did they come back, they go 35-5. They win as a 1 seed. I've got a couple more notes here, but I want to throw it back to you. This was right as you were starting at CBS Sports, CBSSports.com as the lead college basketball columnist. What do you remember about the team? Both of them, 05-06, and then in 06-07, floor is yours, GP.
Okay, so 05-06 was my last year as the Memphis beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. 06-07 was my first year as a columnist for CBSSports.com. So I was around that team as it was going for its second title as much as I've been around any non-Memphis team that I covered as a beat writer. It was also while Florida was awesome at football and also while I had football responsibilities at CBSSports.com. So I don't know how many weeks or weekends I spent in Gainesville in that year.
Tebow, right? Tebow as
well?
Yes,
it was Tim. Yeah, it was like I remember it all being the same time. And I was just down there for Florida football games, and then I would pop in and see Billy, and I was around the team, and I was just there a lot. And I don't know that we'll ever see anything like this again.
I agree with you.
Because it was such an unusual makeup. They returned all 5 starters, as you noted, from a national championship team. And I don't think that'll ever happen again. I mean, never say never, but it was so like the details matter. And the details were this. It starts here, I think. Joakim Noah was the son of a tennis player and a model, and Al Horford was the son of a former professional basketball player. So they're having the time of their life. And just like you noted, it wasn't like they were headed for this. Joakim Noah was just like he wasn't a McDonald's All-American. He was just a guy. I mean, he's a good top 100 player.
They won the title. My memory. So this is just when I'm out of college, before I started College Hoops Journal, 2 years before I was at CBS. My memory thinking back on this was until basically Florida made the deep run in the 06 tournament, a lot of it was like you couldn't read a story or see Joakim Noah talked about on television without references to Yannick Noah, his father, who was once upon a time like a great tennis. Like that was the Joakim Noah story. Winning the championship is when a lot of that stuff started to shed away.
Yeah. So you have I think they received 6 votes in the preseason poll, AP poll, before they won that first title. They were 41st in the preseason poll. They go and as a 3 seed win the national title. I don't think any of them thought they were really winning a national title. I don't think any of them really saw what was coming. And then it's just here, and they were just having the time of their lives. Like if I remember correctly, they lived together. Like I can still like close my eyes and see the apartment that people told me, yeah, that's where they live, in that corner right there. Like I can still see that. And they were just having a blast. And so often when it comes to basketball prospects or just prospects in general, it's like, well, we got to go. The money's just so much, and you got to take the money, and coaches make decisions for these reasons. Players make decisions for these reasons. Humans just outside of sports make decisions for monetary reasons. But it was like, I'm the son of a tennis player and a model. Like, in other words, I ain't hurting for money right now. I'm having the time of my life. I'll do this again if you'll do this again. And then Al Horford's like, yeah, I'm not hurting either. If you'll do this again, I'll do this again. I'm not pretending these conversations actually happen like this, but this is sort of where we don't come from backgrounds where we got to take the money at first shot. So let's just keep doing this. And then Corey Brewer, who probably did need to go. He's from like rural Tennessee. He was like, well, if everybody else is staying, I guess I'll stay. Because the other two, Torian Green, Lee Humphrey, they didn't really have early entry NBA things attached to them. So it's like the two that do say I'm staying because we don't need to go necessarily. Corey Brewer's like, if everybody else is staying, I'm staying. And next thing you know, all 5 starters from a championship team are back. And then I remember I was in Vegas with them. They played Kansas early, like maybe day after Thanksgiving.
We've talked about this on the show a long time ago. Remember, I remember that Kansas game. So I was out of college in a house with like 5 other buds. And I remember that game being so much anticipation building to the Kansas-Florida game in Vegas. Think about back then, it's not you didn't have neutral site games between highly ranked non-conference opponents, but they weren't nearly as prevalent then as they basically became in the subsequent years after that. So to that point, GP, that was, the first really big game for the reigning national champions against, a Kansas team that was obviously loaded. Kansas had continued to be good. So I'm glad you invoked that because, the sentiment around that, this is, I understand for young people listening and watching this, if you weren't there for it, it's kind of hard to encapsulate really the amount of anticipation and semi-skepticism over whether Florida was actually going to do this again because they weren't the best team in the country the previous season going in. Although ironically enough, Florida this past season, the 07 championship Florida team, those teams did not finish number 1 at KenPom. The 06 team finished number 1. Right. That's the highest finishing Florida team ever, and it was the lowest seeded team of 3, which is interesting. So it was the most efficient within the context of its season. It only had 1 game in that 06 tournament decided by single digits. It got past Georgetown with Jeff Green and our guy Roy Hibbert in the Sweet 16 by 4 points. But every other game they beat the best Nova team, GP under Jay Wright to that point. Alan Ray, Randy Foy, Mike Nardi, Will Sheridan. That team was a 1 seed, and they beat them. They cruised past them. They beat Mason in the Final Four, and then they faced 2 seed UCLA in the title game in 06, and they won by 16. Anyway, continue on. But
So, and they, to your point, they weren't even unanimous preseason number 1 after returning all 5 starters from a national championship team, which like makes no sense to me. But whatever.
I know.
They weren't a unanimous number 1. So then they come back. The first big game is that Kansas game in Vegas. They lose it. And then 2 games later, they lose to Florida State. So they start 7-2. Then they go on a 17-game winning streak. And while that's going on, I guess they lose to Vandy on February 17th. I remember that because I was also there. I was at Memorial. And
Vandy was good at the folks. Vandy was good at the time.
Yeah. And it was like, I wrote a column about this. I didn't take the time to go back and find it, but I remember writing about Joakim Noah off of that game because I just sort of witnessed this interesting scene. The whole, like, by this time he's a star and he's got the hair and he's a big personality. And like, it was a pretty common taunt among college basketball fans and visiting in road games. They just call him ugly, just like some version of like, you're ugly. It was just like, you're an ugly person. That's what they would do to him all the time. And so I just remember this happening at Vanderbilt. And it was just, as he's walking off the court, it's just like pointing fingers and yelling and screaming. And then as he's walking from the locker room to the bus to get back to the airport, there's like some Vanderbilt fans who encounter him and it immediately shifts from he's had 15,000 Vanderbilt fans yelling mean stuff at him for 2 hours. And now they're just like, Joakim Noah, can we get a picture? And he just went over there and was the nicest and just great to them. And it was just a weird interaction. Like, you are public enemy number 1 up until somebody wants a picture with you. I guess it was a sign of where the whole world's going.
Sure.
But I just remember that being interesting. Like, I don't know. It's something in my head. At some point in this season, you'll remember this. Do you remember the Dick Vitale aspect of this?
I actually.
Okay, you'll know when I say it.
Cue me up, because what I thought you were going to here was they lose 3 out of 4 games down the stretch, and maybe this is what you're talking about, but it went from, okay, this is a dominant team, to now they're bored. This is going to cost them in the tournament. They've lost their momentum. They've lost the desire. It became probably the biggest talking point heading into the conference tournament. This Florida team that had lost 3, and they got rolled. They lost 3 games out of 4 by double digits. I remember that being a thing. Continue, Chief.
So while this is happening, they lose 3 or 4. You're exactly right. And Dick Vitale is scheduled to go on, I believe, Knoxville radio. And we've all been on radio shows as a guest. We know how this goes. A producer calls you, hey, Matt, it's so-and-so with the WB whatever in whatever. you got 15 minutes for the guys? And you're like, yeah, of course, ready to go. And this is the way it works. And they're like, all right, we'll be back in 90 seconds. All right. Dick Vitale is clearly having breakfast. I think it's called the broken egg, where he has breakfast all the time. And he answers the phone, producers call. And in that time period between we've called to get you on the phone, but we're not live yet, we'll get you in a minute, whatever, he just starts talking to somebody. It appears to be somebody who's walking by the table at the breakfast. And they're like, hey, Dickie V, so what's going on with Florida? It's like that. All right. He lives in Florida. And this is the quote. I went back and found it. Dick is talking to somebody, but they are now live on radio. It's like, and now we're joined by ESPN's Dick Vitale. Hey, Dick, it's so-and-so and so-and-so in Knoxville. He doesn't hear any of this. He's talking to somebody else.
Oh, man.
And they're live on the air, and this is what comes out over the air. It's clearly Dick Vitale talking to somebody at breakfast, not realizing he's live on radio. And he says, Billy Donovan grabbed me all alone and said the pro scouts are making a mistake. He said, there's no way I would take Noah over Horford. He said he would never say that publicly, but there's no way he would take Noah over Horford.
Which, by the way, proved to be the right take.
Oh, it was right. It was right. It was right. In fairness, all these years later, Billy Donovan and Dick Vitale were right.
Horford, okay. Noah was a fine pro, but Horford certainly by far the best.
I mean, still playing. Yeah. He's still playing.
Yes.
But that was a thing that they had to deal with. Like that can break your life. That can mess your locker room up bad. If you know your coach is out there saying there is no way I would take him over him. And that was something they had to navigate. Billy was asked about it publicly, and he was just like, I don't have any comment on something I didn't say. And Dick was like, I really put Billy in a bad spot. And it was a thing that they had to deal with, and they dealt with it, and they go and they win the national championship, and they were the first back-to-back champions we had in a long time.
It was 15 years since we saw the previous one with Duke. In some way, like in real time, looking back on it, to me, it felt longer than that. But I think a lot of that was just a function of growing up. Like the years seem longer when you're younger versus when you're older and all that. The wait to get to UConn was even longer between Florida and UConn than it was Duke to Florida to begin with. Quick refresher on the 07 teams run through the tournament there. They beat an average Purdue team by 7. Then Butler was a 5 seed in the next round. This is after, beating a low-level opponent in round 1. Butler was coached by Todd Licklider. Brad Stevens was an assistant on that staff. They beat Butler by 8. AJ Graves was the best player on that team. 6'1" AJ Graves was the best player on that Butler team. Then they beat 3-seed Oregon, which had 29 wins, had Aaron Brooks, Malik Hairston, and Tawan Porter. They won by 12 in that game. Then they play UCLA again. It's mostly like Aaron Aflalo, Darren Collison, Luke Richard, and Mba Amute. Man, oh man. Well, let's remember some dudes right now.
I remember all those guys.
They were on the team that was they were on the team the year before that lost Florida in the title game. Yeah. So many things. Just like
Florida might have cost Ben Howland 2 national titles.
So like what could have been if not for Florida? Like if UCLA doesn't, or if UCLA wins one of those, wins one national championship, Ben Howland isn't out of UCLA. It was some years later. They went to 3 Final Fours in 3 consecutive years. This is the 07 is the year before the Kevin Love and Russell Westbrook team and all that stuff. But nevertheless, Florida knocked off UCLA in the Final Four / national championship game 2 years in a row. It was the Final Four in 07. Then Florida beats the Ohio State team with Greg Oden, Mike Conley. Oden, was not entirely healthy the entire season, but Florida deserved
Oden. Trivia time. Oden, Conley, and the other heralded freshman. Name them.
Oh, I know, dude. I know it. But I'm not going to.
Is it Daquan Cook?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Good call. A loaded Ohio State team.
Self-trivia time.
Yeah, there we go. Love it. Love when we pull that out. In retrospect, let me bring up the Ken Pom year. Just I don't know if those 2 teams are 1-2. I think Carolina was amazing that year in 07. They might be number 1 in Ken Pom. Let me bring this up here. It was Carolina. So what I was going to say, though, was Florida playing Ohio State in the national championship game. Looking back at that all these years later, those are the 2 teams that should have played in the national championship game. Now, Carolina did rank number 1 that season. They had Hansbrough as a sophomore, Ty Lawson as a freshman, Wayne Ellington as a freshman, Brendan Wright as a freshman, Danny Green as a sophomore. But Florida and Ohio State seemed to make the most sense playing in the national championship game. And Florida winds up winning it there, and they beat Ohio State. It was a big-time deal. It should have been a big-time deal. It's easily one of the 15 biggest stories of the past 25 years in college basketball. but I think it is narrowly usurped by UConn winning back-to-back championships in 23-24. So let's transition and talk Huskies right now. This is the most recent story on the list that made the list, if you will. Nothing else that's in the top 25 will have happened as recently or frequently for the most part. There's one interpretation of another story that you could say technically is like 2025. We'll get to that down the way. I put UConn ahead of Florida because UConn did it more dominantly. It did it with a very brash, confident, headline-grabbing coach who ascended to face of the sport status when, by nature of winning back-to-back championships, Billy Donovan solidified his Hall of Fame credentials by winning back-to-back championships, and that's now been proven literally true. Dan Hurley did the same by doing this, but it was the way that UConn did it to me that makes it ever so slightly of a bigger story. It's 14 and 15. There's barely any difference between the two. In 2023, UConn was 31-8 and a 4 seed, had all 6 of its tournament games decided by double-digit margins and an average of 20 points. They won every tournament game by at least 13. They were only the 5th team ever to win every tournament game by at least 13 points. But yeah, they'd done things like they held every tournament opponent under 35%. No team had ever done that before 2023 UConn. They trailed for a total of 55 seconds in 6 second halves in the 2023 tournament. They didn't lose a game outside of Big East competition that season in its entirety. And the only other teams that ever did that to win a national championship and not lose a game outside of league play were 66-67 UCLA and 08-09 Carolina. Those were blue bloods. And then let me just take 2024 GP and then it's all you. The 24 team's even better. They're 37-3. They're by far the best team in the sport. They're the number 1 overall seed. They do so despite losing, they lost Andre Jackson, Adama Sanogo, Jordan Hawkins. They lost those 3 key pieces. Caravan and Tristan Newton come back. Newton ascends to starting point guard status and really dominates all the more. This is what I wrote the night of the title game. I wrote a 12 straight NCAA tournament victory by double digits /13 plus points. It's a record likely to never be broken. An all-time team, one I'd comfortably put among the 10 best since John Wooden retired in 1975. Do not take this dominance for granted. Do not normalize what hadn't ever been achieved heretofore. What the Huskies did this year isn't supposed to happen. The only other team to win consecutive title games by 15 plus points was UCLA from 1967 to 69. Those wins featured Lou Alcindor, who was considered the greatest college player ever. Speaking of legends, Hurley puts his name alongside names like Wooden, Iba, and Rupp and Krzyzewski as back-to-back champions. They are all Hall of Famers. One day Hurley will join them. This win assures it will happen. Last year was about UConn cementing its case as a blue blood. It was so convincing you never heard it brought up this season or this tournament. It was accepted as fact because it is. I put UConn slightly ahead. They were even better. The 24 team won all of its tournament games by more than 23 points, even better than the outstandingly dominant 23 group. Your thoughts on UConn doing it back-to-back in the not so distant past here?
I think the Florida back-to-back is more interesting. It's just a more unusual story. It's the same group of starters doing it in consecutive years. It's multiple projected first-round picks returning to school at a time where basically no projected first-round picks came back to school. But undeniably, the UConn team was more dominant. The Florida back-to-back stuff was, I think, the better movie. If we're making movies, it's the better movie. It's the one I think that will have a longer lasting memory. In other words, off the top of my head, I can say Torian Green, Lee Humphrey, Corey Brewer, Joakim Noah, Al Horford. I think I'll know that until memory loss sets in. I think I'll know that forever. Like, how many college basketball teams that you weren't necessarily a fan of can you just remember the starting lineup for the rest of your life?
Right. There's the list of that is lesser than. Yeah.
It's like a UNLV team, And
I mean, some of this is a function of how much the sport means to you when you're younger. I get all that, but like the UConn stuff is so recently. Like, yeah, I understand.
I don't know.
In 20, that was a bigger role in 24. Stephon Castle joins in. Alex Caravan, Cam Spencer. I mean, I don't know, maybe, but yeah, like you say.
I think it's 20 years basically removed now, and I still can picture that starting lineup. And at any minute of any day, you could be like, so who were the guys that started for Florida when they went back to back? And I could just go right to it. I don't know that in 20 years people will be able to do that with these UConn back-to-back teams, but that second UConn team, I know they weren't unbeatable because they were beaten, but my God, it got to a point where it looked like they were unbeatable. Like we could play this again tomorrow if we want to. I think they'd probably just win the whole thing again.
Right.
Like so often we talk about if we started this tournament over and played it again, who would win it? And I think like they would just win it again. I think they would just win it a lot.
Yeah, they were outrageous. They beat their 6 tournament opponents by 140 points. That's the most combined margin of victory in the history of the NCAA tournament. The previous one was one of the all-time great teams as well, 95, 96 Kentucky. And yeah, no, it was an understandably huge deal. It was, the first one got UConn to blue blood status. The second one just elevated them to like, I don't want to say near mythical levels, but it's hard for teams to go back to back. I mean, Oklahoma State in the 40s, Kentucky in the 40s, San Francisco in the 50s, Cincinnati in the 60s, UCLA obviously throughout the 60s, Duke and Florida. Those are the only programs that have ever won back to back. It can happen. It's just harder. And who's to say, GP? Like, I'd love if you told me at some point in the next decade, 10 to 20 years, that we'll get to cover another program that wins back-to-back championships, because it's a really, really cool thing to be able to track and follow and cover in person. But we don't know. It took
could be Florida next season.
It could, and you know what? It could be, which would be outrageous. Is that if that actually happened and you had 2 schools go back-to-back in that kind of period, that would the closest thing we've had to that would have had to that would have been. I mean, geez, it would have been literally Oklahoma State and Kentucky in the 40s, and even then they weren't sandwiched back-to-back right against each other. It just almost never happens there. So UConn is 14 on the list. We're a little squeezed for time, but let's keep it moving here. We're going to get to 13 right after this. In fact, GP, I know we're a little squeezed for time. We're going to this is going to be a stroll down memory lane. It ties GP, Memphis, Kentucky. John Calipari and his decision to leave the Tigers and coach the Wildcats in 2009 is number 13 on the list. We'll get to that right after this break.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
So we're on to number 13 of the top 25 college basketball stories of the past 25 years. It's Norlander's list, and at number 13, he put John Calipari leaves Memphis for Kentucky. It's the first huge college basketball coaching change dominated by online coverage.
Yes,
before I talk for 11 straight minutes,
okay.
Just what do you remember about that time?
Yes, okay. So for me at this point, it's 2009. I'm not at CBB. I'm running College Hoops Journal, so I'm tracking this, blogging it like daily. I remember I was also a sports editor of 2 newspapers in the Fairfield County area in Connecticut. So I remember being in my tiny New Canaan news office, like tracking this stuff online, variety of sources like Deadspin, CBSSports.com, ESPN, Kentucky media, Memphis media, SB Nation, the Big Lead. Like when Rob Doster, our buddy, was running a site called Ballin' Is a Habit, there were college basketball blogs, Storming the Floor, Rush the Court. Like this thing really did have an element to it that I'm sure in like that year, the year before, maybe even the year before that, like 08, 07, there probably was a coaching search in college football that I just wasn't nearly as invested in or privy to that matched this kind of level. But I do think that Calipari leaving Memphis for Kentucky was something of a watershed moment when it came to coaching carousel in college basketball and how online coverage seemed to usurp traditional media coverage, print media, television media, all of that. There was a Memphis television station that famously and innocuously really set up a live camera shot of a door exiting one of the Memphis athletic facilities and kept it rolling and was garnering in thousands and thousands and thousands of live views just to wait and see if and when John Calipari would exit that door, so we would have some sort of indication on if he was indeed leaving Memphis for Kentucky, when we would know about all this. Real quick, let me just do the setup, and then it's all UGP. Mm-hmm. Remember, Tubby Smith was the coach at Kentucky, won a championship in 98. The reason why this even happens is he wins a championship in 98, but they never get back to the Final Four. He gets the Elite Eight 3 times, a couple of Sweet 16s, but he can't get back. So the fan base grows frustrated. He winds up leaving, going to Minnesota. They hire Billy Gillespie in 07 after they could not get Billy Donovan. And I don't know, I don't remember, maybe you can speak to this, if the gap was like Donovan, nobody, and then Gillespie, if there were a couple other guys that were involved in that. I can't remember that particular thing. I remember Donovan turned them down when Kentucky thought they would get Donovan in conference. Coincidentally enough, as we just talked about with the Florida teams that won back-to-back championships. Didn't happen there. Gillespie gets the job. It doesn't go well. He doesn't have the personality. He doesn't have the temperament for it. We don't need to go down this whole road, but like he didn't treat the players well whatsoever. And after barely making the tournament in year 1 and getting bounced one and done, they don't even qualify for the tournament in year 2. Everyone around Lexington knew basically halfway through his second season, Gillespie was not going to make it after year 2. They again try and get Donovan. I dug up a couple of your old columns. First of all, Parrish used to have a column on CBSSports.com or a blog called Parrish the Thoughts.
How creative.
Which I love.
I would cringe at that today.
Parrish the Thoughts. So good. So good. Here's real quick. One thing you wrote. Dateline, Memphis, Tennessee, March 27, 2009. With Billy Donovan out of the picture, Kentucky must now turn elsewhere. Tom Izzo, that would be excellent. John Calipari, that would be tremendous. But I'm less sure about Travis Ford. And I like Travis Ford. He was great at Oklahoma State this season. That school is lucky to have him. But the reality is that Ford has coached 9 Division I seasons at 3 different schools and been to 2 NCAA tournaments, which doesn't suggest he's guaranteed success anywhere, much less somewhere like Kentucky. He might, or he could miss the tournament in 3 straight years like he did at UMass.
I don't know why I had to give Travis Ford a stray.
It was a 250-word blog post update in the middle of the afternoon on March 27th.
I'm assuming somebody had reported that he was a candidate at Kentucky.
I'm guessing, but you also mentioned Cal, Jay Wright. Those guys, again, this is after Gillespie, as he's getting fired. He got chased out of the damn building by Alan Cutler. It was a wild scene.
It was a wild scene. So,
and the reason why, I didn't put Cal leaving Kentucky for Arkansas on the list. It was close. That was also that's an all-timer that I will never forget. I will never forget that 5-hour period on the Sunday before the title game a year ago when he left for Arkansas. It was a huge story. Frankly, if I did a top 30 stories of the past 25 years, that would have been on the list. But to me, him leaving Memphis for Kentucky is a bigger deal because of where he was at in his career and the after effects, GP. I'm trying to give you everything here, and then it's all you. Yeah. You think about what Memphis was after this. I'm not going to read it, but I looked up another one of your blog posts. Apparently, Tim Floyd was really thought to be in there. It wound up being Pastner, but people thought it would be Floyd. Floyd didn't want to follow Phil Jackson in the NBA and then Calipari in college. It didn't wind up happening there. But you think about how Memphis hasn't been the same since. What Calipari turned Memphis into, dominated CUSA, and I could make the case that if Cal had not taken the Kentucky job, Memphis probably isn't in the conference it's in right now. Even if it only stays like another 2-3 years, I think it's truly enough to change the trajectory of that Memphis program. And then you see what Calipari becomes at Kentucky, the greatest recruiter we've ever seen in the history of college basketball, sets records for draft picks, one-and-doners, lottery picks, all of this stuff. Only wins 1 national championship, but it was a genre redefinition of what could be possible at a blue blood with the perfect coach at the perfect time, an amazing recruiter, all of it. That's why it's so high on the list. It was a surreal thing to follow in real time. And then although, even if you want to say Cal ultimately underachieved, big picture with what he did at Kentucky, he did change the dynamic of college basketball for essentially a generation by choosing to do this in 2009.
So the truth is Kentucky probably should have hired him when Tubby left. But at that moment, there was, the way I remember it at least, the way people talked about it at least, was there was a sentiment at Kentucky where we don't hire somebody like John Calipari.
Yeah.
That was the,
because even at that point, Kentucky was too good for alleged cheaters, so to speak.
That is like,
yeah, I hear you. I'm not disagreeing.
That was the sentiment.
Yeah.
All right. We don't hire. We're Kentucky. We're not hiring somebody like John Calipari. Well, then they hire Billy Gillespie. That's a disaster. And at that point, I think they realize, whether it's Mitch specifically or somebody else, we can't miss again. So what is the surefire thing? Yeah, Billy Donovan would be wonderful. Jay Wright would be wonderful. But before we go hire another Billy Gillespie or up-and-comer or risky thing, we know John Calipari will win here. We might not like everything that's attached to John Calipari, but we know what will happen. He's going to win big. And so they pulled the trigger on it. And he understandably left. But, buddy, it shook this city in a way that it is, I think, hard to
They're
understand.
still not over it, right? Fair to say?
Not
Is Memphis
completely
over this yet?
Not completely.
Yeah.
I mean, John took him to 4 straight Sweet 16s, including 3 Elite Eights and a national title game in that run, and they have not been back to the Sweet 16 since. They have not been to the Sweet 16 since he left here. The other reason it was so unusual is because it dragged out in ways that it didn't need to drag out, but for understandable reasons. Just looking back on it, so they lose to Missouri in the Sweet 16 on that Thursday, which is March 26th. On that Saturday, I am literally sitting at Blue City Cafe on Bill Street watching Elite Eight games with John Robick, who is like John Calipari's right-hand man. It's me and Robick. I don't think he would mind me telling the story. At some point, he has to get up. The story at that point is John's in Chicago going to see Derrick Rose. They're playing the Pacers on that Saturday night. And John's just in Chicago. At some point, like, John calls Robick, Cal does, and Robick has to get up and walk outside. And he's standing outside on Bill Street talking on the phone to John Calipari. And I swear to God, this is true. The only thing he said to me when he came back in, because I didn't know, he just like, hey, I got to take this call. The only thing he said when he came, and I just remember this for some reason. Here's what he said. My guy can't make any decisions without talking about it for an hour, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, clear, like something was happening. Subsequently, what I found out, he was in Chicago meeting with Kentucky that night. It wasn't just about going to the Bulls to see Derrick Rose. He was meeting with Kentucky officials in Chicago. At that time, they had letters of intent on some of the best basketball prospects in the country. I don't remember exactly, but like I think it was like the recruiting class was going to be John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins.
I think it was that. I don't know if he had Bledsoe at that point, but yeah.
I don't think they had Bledsoe yet, but Xavier Henry. It was like the number one recruiting class in the country. Memphis was probably going to be preseason number 1. All right. At least had a chance to be preseason number 1. And the way the rules were written at the time, the second he's not the Memphis coach anymore, he is not allowed to talk to prospects who have signed letters of intent with the University of Memphis. So at least the way the story's told, the way I remember it being told to me at that time, yes, he's taken the Kentucky job, but not yet. Maybe not even today, because he's still trying to recruit these other guys to Kentucky. And once he resigns at Memphis and accepts the Kentucky job, he can't talk to John Wall anymore or whoever those prospects were. So it was like, it's not just about just taking the job. He's got to get these recruits lined up to go to Kentucky and then pull the trigger. And so it dragged out. In the meantime, Memphis was doing everything they can do to try to keep him. It was always going to be a losing battle because John always wanted to be on that side of the rope, if you will. He always felt like an outsider. Like, I'm one of the best college coaches who has ever existed. Why am I coaching at UMass in Memphis? I'm one of the best who's ever done this, maybe the best doing it right now. Why am I at UMass in Memphis? He always felt like he was pushed on that side of the rope. Like, you don't belong over here with the And so he, like, getting that invitation was something he always wanted and was always going to accept. But Memphis was doing everything. And I was told, I don't know whether it was Fred Smith specifically, Fred Smith, who just passed, last month, founder of FedEx. But it was like people like Fred Smith, the money people in Memphis who had relationships with John. I don't know exactly who delivered this message, but I was told that group of people delivered this message to John. You just coached in a national championship game. You've got the number 1 recruiting class in the country. We will give you everything you need to succeed. If you want to be the highest paid coach in the country, we can do that. Whatever Kentucky's offering you, we can match it or exceed it. You have consistently told 17-year-old basketball players for 9 years that they do not have to go to Kentucky or Duke to reach their dreams.
Yeah.
That you can accomplish everything you want to accomplish at Memphis. If you want to be the number 1 pick of the draft, you can do that from Memphis. Derrick did it. If you want to win a national championship, you could do that at Memphis. We were a Mario Chalmers missed 3-pointer away from doing it. If you really believe all that stuff, there's no reason for you to leave. And he was like, yeah, that's recruiting. I remember him saying this phrase at one point. When you're selling Coke, you sell Coke. When you're selling Pepsi, you sell
Dude,
Pepsi.
did you not look up your
I
column?
did not look it up. Is that in there somewhere?
I'm going to read it to you right now real quick, okay? This is the back half of the column. This is April 1, 2009. So you're probably on your way to the Final Four at this point.
Yeah.
Man, okay, here we go. Do you know about the NIT parade? Calipari's second season in Memphis, just like in his first, results in a trip to the NIT. It was a massive disappointment considering the Tigers had 3 players, DeJuan Wagner, Antonio Burks, and Earl Barron, who went on to play in the NBA. Again, Calipari had 3 pros plus Kelly Wise, Chris. We are remembering some dudes on this pod right now. Kelly Wise, Chris Massey, Scooter McFadden, and Anthony Rice. And all he could manage was an NIT title. And this is the type of thing that would have had a different coach facing serious criticism, but not Calipari, because he flipped things by scheduling an NIT parade. Seriously, an NIT parade on Beale Street. He called it important and he sold it. People bought it. Fans came and cheered like it was the World Series. And this is Calipari's greatest attribute, his ability to sell. For 9 years, he sold Memphis. Now he'll sell Kentucky. And don't expect the messages to be similar, because when you sell Pepsi, you sell Pepsi. And when you sell Coke, you sell Coke. In other words, Calipari has spent the past 9 years telling recruits they didn't need to go to a place like Kentucky because they could accomplish everything they wanted to accomplish at Memphis. But the only reason he said it is because he was at Memphis instead of Kentucky. It's wild that you did not look that up and you just pulled up what I said before.
But I wrote
more than 16 years ago.
I remember that analogy specifically. And so to circle back to your initial question, like, is Memphis over this? It's getting better. There is some thought, like it is in the works, that Cal's going to bring Arkansas to FedEx Forum to play Memphis. To raise money for St. Jude.
That would be awesome.
Awesome. Like Cal and Penny did a podcast together a couple weeks ago. It published literally yesterday. And John said that he would like for all of his former players, literally every former player of his at Memphis, to be brought back to Memphis for that game. And like, let's turn it into not just a celebration of John Calipari, but of all the people who were part of the John Calipari era. I guess there's safety in numbers, but I do like it's softening. It's defrosting, if you will, the relationship between Memphians and John Calipari. There will be a day where he is celebrated in that building. There was always going to be a day, just like Nolan Richardson can go back to Bud Walton now. And at a time, it didn't feel like that was something that was happening. Time heals all this stuff, or at least lots of this stuff. Bob Knight went back to Assembly Hall eventually. John will be back in FedEx Forum. And if it is this year, literally in this calendar year, that would be awesome because he deserves it. For as hurt as Memphians were by the departure, and really that's all it was. They will talk about it's the way he left, but just him leaving, no matter how he did it, it was always going to hurt and be bad and run counter to the things that he had said out loud over and over again. But it was always going to be bad and tough for some people to get over, but most people are softening on that. At least there was a time as recently as, let's just say, 5 years ago, where if you tried to bring John Calipari back to Memphis, it would be bad. He would get booed. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think if he brings the Razorbacks to FedEx Forum, it'll be a pleasant experience for everybody. And I don't want to overstate it, but like the city needs that, like those are great memories. I said this the day after he left on radio in Memphis and people didn't want to hear it, but it's true. For most of us who live in the city, the best years that Memphis basketball will ever experience happened under John Calipari. Those 4 years, his last 4 years, we've never seen anything like that before, and we will likely never see anything like that again. And we should be able to, and I'm using the word we because I am a Memphian, and like that is my alma mater. We should be able to feel great about those years. And for a long time, people haven't been comfortable doing that, but I think it's changing.
Just a huge story. And the image of Billy Gillespie essentially running out of Kentucky's facilities to dodge Alan Cutler. And there might have been another media reporter, a television reporter, totally surreal. Just absolutely wild. Had to be high on the list. Let's get to number 12. Number 12 is Zion Williamson becoming the biggest star of this century in college basketball and taking over that 2018-2019 season. Back during March, I published a list of the biggest stars in college basketball of the past 25 years. And in building this list, I went back and looked at it again and tried to see, okay, were there certain aspects to this list that needed to cross over to this one? And I'm sorry, Zion Williamson was a once in a quarter century at minimum type of player. His stats were outrageous. We're just coming off of the Cooper Flagg stuff, and he was in many ways, Cooper Flagg was the best one and done freshman Duke has ever had, but in many other ways, Zion Williamson actually was the best freshman that Duke has ever had as a one and done player there, because his stats were better than Flagg's. He is the record holder for single season player efficiency rating. His win shares were 8.3, which is ridiculous. He shot better than 70% from the field in effective field goal percentage. He was a National Player of the Year, runaway, not even close, and he had another first team All-American on his roster with RJ Barrett. That's ridiculous. I don't know if we will ever see that again that happen. He averaged 22.6 points, 8.9 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 2.1 steals, 1.8 blocks, and his numbers would have been even better had he not missed, essentially 5 games due to that foot injury. He had Obama coming to his games. In some ways, like, he was a supernova. And as I was doing this list and building it out, I do feel like we're a little more than 6 years removed from this. And it's starting to feel like maybe his impact and what he was in that season is I'm not saying big, I'm saying slightly undervalued in 2025. Maybe that's because he has not been in the NBA what he was in college. He's missed plenty of games. He's had injuries. But he was, when this happened, I mean, he was the biggest star since Tyler Hansbrough in college, and he had 10 times the charisma. So that is number 13 on this list. It is the once in a generation megawatt supernova that was Zion Williamson, playing of all places, playing at Duke, with that game, with that name. He looked different. We had never seen someone who played the way that he played, and he was immediately a thing from game one when you and I were there in Indianapolis at Champions Classic, and Duke absolutely decimated Kentucky, GP.
Beat him by 34. By 34. Tyler Hero, PJ Washington, Emmanuel Quickley were on that team. Beat him by 34. What's interesting about the Zion story, and I agree with you, it's got to be on this list somewhere, he was a phenomenon. And it's a little something's lost given the way his NBA career has gone. It's almost like people don't, I can circle this back to the first story we talked about today, or one of the first stories we talked about today. Florida winning back-to-back titles, the second one over Greg Oden in Ohio State. Greg Oden is just thought of these days as like the number one pick, the guy picked before Kevin Durant, who injuries robbed him of everything. But like, go back and watch that national championship game. He dominated Joakim Noah, Al Horford. He was so clearly the best player on the court. I remember Horford and Noah like talking about him after the game. Like, they just won back-to-back titles. They were like, that dude's amazing. Okay. That dude's incredible. And Zion's a little bit like that. Like, his NBA career doesn't pick up where his college career left off. But in college, buddy, he was a force. I believe it's the greatest player efficiency rating in college basketball history
Ever.
Yes.
It's kind of why, like, a little bit of like, Flagg was incredible. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Like, what Flagg did was amazing, and Flagg got to a Final Four. Zion's on this list in spite of not even making the Final Four. They got to the Elite Eight, but statistically, Zion was the best. He was, and he didn't even get every game. I just started to almost think like if he had gotten the additional 4 or 5 games there, the numbers would be even more inflated. So it speaks to his genuine star power. And he was number one. If you didn't read the story, he was number one. He's the biggest star in my estimation of college basketball has had on the men's side over the past 25 years. Yes, he has, for player efficiency rating, he is number one. And it's, by the way, it's not even close. Like, he is by far and away the record holder. We're almost certainly not going to see anyone beat that record. It's 40.8.
And so the thing that's different between the Zion Williamson story and the Cooper Flagg story is that the Cooper Flagg story was like, here comes Cooper Flagg. He's going to be the greatest thing ever. Let's see if he can be the greatest thing ever. In some recruiting services, Zion was the 3rd best recruit in Duke's class. All right. RJ Barrett was supposed to be the guy on that Duke team. And he was a first team All-American. I know you forget him sometimes, but he was also a first team All-American. But it became clear very quickly that Zion was more than just a viral sensation with incredible high school dunks. He was widely regarded as a very good basketball player, but mostly the guy we watched dunk on the internet. And then it became clear very quickly, oh no, this is going to be the best basketball player in college. This is going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. and it just never slowed down. He had the moment where he lost the shoe. The shoe burst on him.
Yep.
And he was sidelined for a bit, but he was awesome from start to finish. That's the year we both saw him in the Champions Classic. Then I went to Maui and saw him in those 3 games there. They lost the Maui Invitational to Gonzaga. I think that was Rui Hachimura, right? But just an awesome basketball team and a generational talent. Like, I don't know that it's ever going to be in the NBA what we thought it was going to be. In fact, I would bet against it at this point for a variety of reasons. You can Google it if you want to. But man, you might live the rest of your life and never see a college basketball player dominate college basketball like that again. He was incredible.
He is a bit of an overused phrase, but it is true. He did transcend college. He transcended the sport. I mean, he became one of the biggest sports stars in America the year that he was at Duke. A lot of that is a function of playing at Duke, but was also on an incredible team. He had a lot of other talent around him. That's the thing.
Some of it's the name, Zion.
100%. It's the name. It's the smile. He looked different, super powerful, and just you wanted to see him play in every single game. To me, it just wasn't debatable. He is definitely one of the 15 biggest stories to happen to men's college basketball in the past 15 years. Let's get to the final story of this episode, and that is number 11. Carmelo Anthony, and this is the reason why I have Carmelo Anthony and Syracuse winning the 2003 national championship ahead of Zion, because they won the title. You win the title, you're going to get a bump up here. He becomes the first one-and-done freshman to guide his team to an NCAA title. It was a big deal when we talked about the top players, the top stars, and that thing I wrote. We talked about it in March on an episode there. Melo high on the list for sure. Melo, certainly a known product when he was going into Syracuse. I remember, I'm also informed by this in part because, I was dating a girl who attended Syracuse at the time. I had friends at Syracuse. I wound up seeing Carmelo Anthony play in person multiple times that season, was on campus amid their Final Four push. I think I mentioned it on the show in March. I saw him walking on one of the Syracuse quads, and he had he had a cell phone, early one. But I maintain Carmelo Anthony is the first person I've ever seen done the fake phone call, just so he did, because he was, understandably, I think this was going into, it was going into the Sweet 16 or instead of the Final Four. Can't quite remember that, but he was just a star, and it was kind of wild to see him in the wild, so to speak, as he was in the middle of all this. But 2003 champion, Final Four MOP, second team All-American, by the way, that year, not a first team All-American. Averages 22.2 points, 10.0 rebounds, 2.2 assists. One of those stat lines that I'll always remember. You talk about how you'll never forget the Florida starting 5. It's the 22.2, 10 flat, 2.2 assists. I'll just always remember. He won the title with this weirdly memorable stat line there. He got Jim Boeheim his only national championship. He elevated, so Syracuse's brand, I want to say, GP, for about almost 20 years before that, really to the start of the Pearl Washington days, it was a basketball program. It was certainly in the culture, so to speak, but it was almost good enough. It was always almost good enough. They had made national championship games. They had lost multiple ones there. He was the player that changed it. It wasn't all him. Like, Jerry McNamara was a huge factor as a freshman on that team. Shouts to Craig Forth. Kueth Duaney was obviously very good. Hakeem Warwick gets the block that obviously seals it in the championship game against Kansas. Billy Edelin was a freshman on that team. But I maintain that Carmelo Anthony's 1 year at Syracuse still defines the largest part of his basketball legacy. I would say it's the championship at Cuse. Then it's probably being like a top 3 focal point on multiple gold medal winning Olympic teams. And then I would go to maybe his time with the Knicks, barely over the Nuggets, although he made way more playoffs with the Nuggets and had more playoff success with the Nuggets than he did with the Knicks. But maybe that's a function of playing in New York. But it is it's really that year at Cuse, 02-03. They beat 4 Big 12 teams en route to winning the championship in that tournament. And he was this highly rated player out of Oak Hill that Jim Boeheim got to come to Cuse, and he was it, like, immediately. They played Memphis in the Garden, and Syracuse was just a team you wanted to watch. They weren't the best team that season. They weren't ranked number 1, 2, or 3 for the majority of that season, but they were always interesting. He was consistently awesome, and he made Syracuse a really, really big time deal. So what it meant for Cuse and Melo as a one-and-done freshman to win a national championship, we had not seen this concoction before. And really their journey through the tournament was also fairly memorable. It's number 11 on the list. What do you remember about it, GP?
Well, me and Mike Waters, and maybe not many more people, will go down in history as the only people who were in the building for Carmelo Anthony's first game at Syracuse and last game at Syracuse.
There you go.
Because the
His
first
first
game was
one
at
was Memphis in the Garden, correct?
yeah.
I
was in
remember Dickie V was on another Dickie V reference. GP, sorry to jump you.
Yeah.
I just remember again, like part of this is a function of being younger and just loving the sport then as I do now. But like there was a ton of hype going into that game, like Cal with Memphis and how good is this Carmelo Anthony guy going to be? Syracuse had never really had, like it had been a lot. I don't want to say never. It just had been a long time since they had someone come into college at Cuse with the amount of hype as Carmelo Anthony. And I remember like him showing out in the Garden and it being like, Syracuse really might have something here. Lo and behold, they did.
Yeah, they lost that game though.
Yeah.
Memphis wins it. Jeremy Hunt, the other freshman, Memphis freshman, was terrific, I remember. And I knew I was watching a special freshman. Keep in mind, this was a time where players like Carmelo Anthony didn't even come to college too often. And he's in college. I mean, I can remember doing the week of the game, like a phone interview with Carmelo Anthony. Like, you called somebody at Syracuse and they're like, yeah. And they hand the phone to Carmelo and you're just talking to Carmelo Anthony after practice. And I knew I was watching a special freshman. I didn't know that I was watching an eventual national championship team. By the way, like they were a 3 seed.
Yep.
They finished 8th at KenPom even after winning the national title.
Yes, indeed. Yep.
So I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, but it certainly wasn't expected. But he was terrific. And to your point, obviously he had an incredible USA basketball career, incredible professional career. When I think of Carmelo Anthony, I think of the orange. I think of him in a Syracuse uniform. That is, I don't want to, I'll let Carmelo rank his achievements, but to me, leading Syracuse to Jim Boeheim's only national championship would rank right at the top of the list.
He would have made, if he had never gone to college and was just someone who jumped right from high school to the NBA, and let's just say his career was mostly, he would have easily been in the Hall of Fame. But it is because he chose to play a year in college and win a national championship that Carmelo will have a legacy that's just more distinct and long lasting, because you, to speak to the obvious, like he won a damn ring. Like he got the trophy and he did it at a place like Syracuse. We don't know what Syracuse will be over the next 10, 15, 20 years in the post Jim Boeheim era. But for all of Boeheim's longevity and all of his cantankerousness and all of everything that's attached to Jim Boeheim, I think it's fair to say, on balance, in the aggregate, if you will, that he was probably deserving of getting at least one title. And he doesn't get it if he doesn't get Carmelo Anthony. And it's it was cool to be able to see a lot of this just as an everyday college student in person, and just and to make the 4 hour. I must have drove to Syracuse that 02-03 season. I must have driven up there 4 or 5 times. And I remember it was a special deal. In fact, I bring it up, maybe I didn't. I still have. Hold on 1 second. I think it's on my steps here. I wanted to show it on camera real quick. I'll be back in like 9 seconds. Hold on 1 second.
All right. So on Carmelo Anthony, I did not go to Syracuse while he was at Syracuse, but I believe literally the only time I've ever been to a game at Syracuse happened to be Carmelo Anthony's retirement, jersey retirement.
Still have. Let's remember Josh Pace used to wear an orange headband, and you ever get stuff when you're like 18, 20, 22 and you still have it? I still have this old Syracuse out of the orange headband. Don't ask me why I have this 22, 23 years later. It's actually,
I don't know why you don't wear it every day.
This was purchased the year Melo was at Cuse and all that good stuff. Awesome team, really fun to cover, really fun to watch before I started covering college hoops. And number 11 on the list. It was a pretty big deal. And this is the kind of championship, just to put a button and we can get out of here. Talked about Maryland 02, Kansas in 08, Kentucky in 2012. These are really notable moments over the past 25 years of men's college basketball, but they're just certain championship winning teams, stories that just seem to get referenced and brought up more frequently. If you get that with the Florida teams, I think we'll get that plenty over the next 20 years with those UConn teams. And Carmelo and Cuse in 03 is something that comes up a lot, rightfully so, just on the doorstep of top 10 status.
I was saying while you were away for 9 seconds, I was at his first game at Syracuse, last game at Syracuse, and I believe the only time I've ever actually been to a game at Syracuse was Carmelo Anthony's jersey retirement, number retirement. I was back for that.
When year was that? Do we think that was?
Feels like it was
I'm gonna look it
more
up
than
right
10
now.
years ago now, like 2012. I don't know. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. It's not coming up immediately on a Google search, but regardless, such a funky building too. Yeah, the Carrier Dome. It's unlike anything else. That's a show. That's a show.
Hey, when we come back for this thing, when we pick this up, we're gonna be in the top 10.
We will be
top
in the
10.
That's right.
25 biggest college basketball stories of the past 25 years, minus Bob Knight's termination at Indiana in September of 2000. We're ready to go, buddy. We're ready to go.
Yeah.
Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle. He's a legend. Huck Larnell. Thank you guys for once again watching, listening to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. There's more of us than there are of them. That needs to be reflected in the comments. So do that, and we will talk to you after we all enjoy our July 4th weekend. Till then, take care.